Molly. I'm Mel Underbakke, Dr. Mel Underbakke, and we're here at the Ending Mass Incarceration Conference happening in Atlanta today and tomorrow. We're going to be talking about how to end mass incarceration, how to end imprisonment, and how to, I hope, end the prison industrial complex.
Okay, good morning everybody. Good morning. And welcome to Ending Mass Incarceration Conference, Day 2. How about that? Have we had a good time so far?
Yes.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. And we're all on one accord and trying to make sure we disseminate information to faith-based organizations, all kinds of organizations throughout the country. And we appreciate Ebenezer and Pastor Warnock so much for allowing us to be here at Ebenezer and having this vision that we like to say God gave it. Today, you are in breakout session, the unique impact of mass incarceration on the American Muslim community. Everybody know where we are, right? Okay. And our presenter today, and I want to call him doctor, because anybody that has a law degree, it should have a PhD. But this is Ahmed Mitchell. He's a civil rights attorney and former journalist who serves as the executive director of the Georgia chapter of the Council of American Islamic Relations, as part of America's largest Muslim civil rights organization. Come on in and find a seat facing this way. Georgia. CAIR, Georgia. Works to enhance understanding of Islam, defends civil rights, promotes justice, and empowers American Muslims. The chapter received CAIR's National Chapter of the Year Award in 2016. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Before joining CAIR's Georgia, Edward served as a criminal prosecutor for the city of Atlanta and as a freelance reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He is also a member of the Georgia Association of Muslim Lawyers, a former editor of Atlanta Muslim, and a member of the Board of Trustees of the Islamic Community Center of Atlanta. Edward is also a 2009 graduate of Morehouse College and a 2012 graduate of Georgetown University Law Center. I present to you Edward Ahmed Mitchell.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good morning.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Thank you all for coming today. So everyone knows you're in the right place, the American Muslim community topic. They switched our room, so glad you're here. Nice crowd. Thank you for coming. As was mentioned, I'm Edward Ahmed Mitchell. I'm an attorney here in Atlanta. I serve as the director of CAIR Georgia. That is part of America's largest Muslim civil rights organization. What the NAACP does for African Americans, we do for American Muslims. Put it very simply. Our main focus is countering anti-Muslim discrimination, countering anti-Muslim bigotry. We're usually fighting those battles in either the court of law or the court of public opinion. But we also engage in other activities. We spend a lot of time engaging in interfaith dialogue. The theory being that education is a good vaccine against discrimination. Hard to hate someone if you know a little bit about them. We also do some lobbying, some protesting when we have to. Our staff attorney, Morza Kwaja, is here with us. But another main interest of ours is criminal justice reform. And that's an interest of ours because as Muslims, we're not only interested in defeating Islamophobia, protecting Muslim civil rights. As Muslims, we believe in justice for all people and fighting for justice for all people. And criminal justice, or rather criminal injustice, impacts everyone, as we've heard over the past 24 hours. So number one is a simple matter of caring about justice. Criminal justice reform is important to CAIR. But secondly, criminal justice reform is especially important because of the unique impact that mass incarceration and other problems in the criminal justice system have on the American Muslim community. A uniquely harsh impact in multiple different ways. And that is the topic of today's seminar. That is what we will, God willing, cover today. So, I talk fast, which is bad, but it's going to be beneficial today because after I finish my presentation, I'm going to bring up three leaders who work on these issues to also share their thoughts with you. And I think that's going to enhance our conversation. We have about, until 12 o'clock? Yeah. All right, so we have until 12 o'clock. So the goal is to break it up essentially in two parts. One part, the presentation, one part hearing from our speakers, and then one part Q&A. God willing to all of you. So let's get started. Technology. There we go. Okay, so you already know what CAIR is. So again, these are the topics I want to cover today. So number one, I want to talk about just the facts. What are some statistics about American Muslims in the U.S. prison system? Just so we know what we're talking about, what the basic facts are. Then I want to talk about how mass incarceration impacts us. But I don't want to talk just about the prison system because that's really the end of a long line, right? And when you deal with mass incarceration, if you only focus on dealing with prison conditions and nothing else, you're not solving the problem. If you only focus on sentencing reform, that's one issue, but you're not solving the problem. If you only focus on trying to deal with how cops deal with people on the street, that's great, but it's not solving what happens when they go to the prosecutors, right? So there are multiple different issues we need to talk about when we're talking about mass incarceration, and especially with the Muslim community. So we're going to talk about 4 different topics. One is Muslims as targets of law enforcement investigations, and how this is uniquely unjust in how it's carried out, and how it leads to mass incarceration. We're going to talk about what Muslims go through when they are defendants in the criminal system. That is when they've been charged with a crime, what they undergo, that is perhaps unique to them, or bad for everyone, but especially bad for them. Then, and how that also leads to mass incarceration. Then we want to talk about, okay, what is Muslim life like as a prisoner? You know, what do Muslims go through in the prison system, right? How does that perpetuate lengthy sentences and creating people who are not able to function in society when they get out of prison? So we're going to talk about Muslim life in federal prison and state prison, all of which leads to, I believe, the furtherance of mass incarceration. And then at the end, we'll throw out some solutions, and that will be the jumping off point for hearing from our 3 panelists. Okay? Again, God will all be lofty goals. All right. Let's get that. Okay, so first, Muslims in the U.S. prison system. Let me start by saying it's hard to know exactly how many Muslims there are, hard to know exactly where they are, right? Everything's guesswork. It's an estimate, but educated guesses. So here are some basic facts. General population of the United States, about 324 million people. Of those numbers, of that number of people, the cheat sheet here, but anyone know what percentage of the American community is Muslim? You got the number there, but someone do the math. 1%, yeah, about 0.9%, okay? 0.9% of the American Muslim, the American community is Muslim, about 3 million American Muslims. Again, that's an estimate. You could hear numbers larger than that or even smaller than that. But one thing that all the polls agree upon is that Islam is the fastest growing religion in the United States, and that by 2050 it's estimated we will be the 2nd largest religion at about 2.1%, a bit ahead of the Jewish American community, right? So again, about 300 million Americans, about 3 million American Muslims, 0.9% of the population. Now, what is the general, what is the general American prison population? So how many people in prison? About 3,300,000 people in prison as of 2016. Ignore the Muslim here, that's just a typo, okay? Of the percentage of that of that group, what percentage Muslim? How many Muslim prisoners? Pew Research Center estimated 9%. But it's funny because it's exactly reversed. So that is that American Muslims make up 0.9% of the general population, but 9% of the prison population. You follow me? There we go. So again, 3 million people in prison total, 9% of them Muslims according to the Pew Research Center. And again, it was a rough guesstimate they got. The way they did is they polled chaplains around the country and got the numbers for how many Muslims do you have in this prison, that prison, that prison, and they came up with an estimate of about 9%. And that was as of 2011. And they haven't done it again since 2011. Now, who are Muslims in prison? Demographic makeup, how are they ending up in prison? The first thing to note is that we don't have a problem of a bunch of Muslims going into prison, which would be bad, right? If for some reason Muslims were entering prison at a uniquely high rate, which that happens already to many communities, but it doesn't happen to us. Many people, as you may know, convert to Islam in prison. Okay? So here's some general facts about Muslims in detention. And I say detention because that could be jail, waiting trial, prison. It can also include immigration detention. So number one, most Muslims who are in the jail or prison system are converts to Islam. That is, they were not Muslim when they went into prison, or at least were not practicing Muslims. They came back to it later in life. Number two, most Muslims in jail or prison are people of color, mostly African American, but also a significant number of Hispanics and white Americans as well, mostly converts. In immigration detention, most are, as you might expect, of Middle Eastern, African, or Asian descent, if you're in immigration detention, obviously. And again, this comes from most of the Pew Research. So again, some basic facts about who Muslims are in the prison system, okay? So, what are some unique challenges that American Muslims face in the criminal justice system, and how do these unique challenges lead to mass incarceration, the problem of mass incarceration? First, I want to talk about what American Muslims go through before they're ever in prison, before they're charged with a crime, when they're just being targeted by law enforcement, when they're just under suspicion for doing something wrong that they may or may not have done, or something they may be thinking about supposedly doing that they were never going to do in the first place. So first, Muslims as targets. So what do we see in that? So number one, we see discriminatory surveillance of American Muslims, right? That could be everything from monitoring international phone calls that Muslim Americans in particular have with people overseas. It could be sending informants into mosques to spy on people. The NYPD had a very extensive and complicated spying program in the Muslim community for years that was eventually shut down, so they say. Sending paid informants into mosques, not only just to monitor and see what's going on, but to actually try to needle people and to give them ideas to see if they will act out some sort of violent plot that they can then be arrested for. And many people targeted in these kind of incidents are young, silly, sometimes mentally ill, and might be people who have politically, I say political distance, people who have politically unique views. They may be angry about American foreign policy, who isn't? They may have some harsh feelings about President Trump or presidents before him, right? And they may not express themselves in the clearest way, right? And so these paid informants can mess with them and get them to go a little too far, and then next thing you know, you're locked up. Yeah. Let me give you some examples. This is an individual who was a paid informant, and I like this story because he was, number one, had a criminal background himself, criminal. Used by the FBI, sent into mosques to spy on people, to needle people, to encourage people to do bad things in the hope that someone would agree with him. The funny thing is that he was sent to a mosque in LA, and he started talking crazy about terrorism and violence and all this stuff, trying to get to different people, and what ended up happening is the mosque reported him to the FBI and banned him from the mosque. You follow me? Right? And then later it came out all the horrible things he'd been doing and getting away with because he was an FBI informant. So they kind of let him go wild in his personal life because he was helping them to target supposed terrorists, right? That's just one story, but it's not unique, but it's funny. It's like to share that. Another issue that Muslims face is being targeted by bad training. So that is, you're not only spying on Muslims, you're not only trying to entrap Muslims, but you are also training law enforcement officers to fear the American Muslims they are sworn to protect and serve. And one of the key ways to do that is to give them bad training. This has happened all around the country, but I want to give you two Georgia examples. So in 2018, CAIR Georgia exposed a police training class that was being taught in the state for 5 years by a man named David Bores, B-O-R-E-S, you can look him up. He was a former local police chief up in Woodstock, Georgia, North Georgia. He retired and then decided to dedicate his life to going around and teaching the public about the danger of Islam and Muslims. And he would go to mostly Republican Party groups, Tea Party groups, and just talk crazy. Muslims want to take over the country. Mosques are not house of worship. They're military installations. Muslim men can rape little boys because boys don't have beards, literally. And we caught him on tape saying this crazy stuff, right? So long story short, I actually met him in 2012 before I was a civil rights activist, before I was a prosecutor, back when I was a prosecutor. He was speaking to a local Republican Party in my hometown. I went to watch, and it was just the craziest stuff you'd ever heard. He was so effective at teaching people to hate the religion and fear its followers that I still remember someone in the room murmuring, well, if they Muslims are going to kill us, maybe we should start killing them. Right? Yeah. So that was in 2012 when I first met him. Okay? Fast forward 7 years. I'm now a civil rights attorney. And I learned that this man has been teaching undercover, quietly, training classes about Islam and terrorism to Georgia law enforcement officers for 5 years. He taught over 1,000 officers, and these officers were getting training credit for attending his class. This is a slide from one of his presentations. As you can see here, it says Norway's Muslim rape wave leads 100% of all rapes in Norway by Muslims and immigrants, which is not true.
Yeah.
But this is what cops are being taught, right? So when you're teaching police officers this, right, who are they going to be afraid of? Who are they going to target? Who's going to end up in jail, right? Either they didn't do anything at all or weren't going to do anything, right? So that's just one example. That was shut down, by the way. We had to fight and scream and kick, but it was shut down, thank God. Another example of bad training that I believe leads to mass incarceration, leads to the targeting and imprisonment of American Muslims. We have a state training program here in Georgia called the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, founded back in the 1990s, and it arranges for, number one, Georgia cops to engage in training with foreign nations, Egypt, China, Israel, Hungary, a bunch of other countries. It also does its own teaching of different topics, urban policing, community policing, counterterrorism, and once again, anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-immigrant bigotry being taught to officers around the state. Unlike David Boers, who was only going to rural areas, to conservative areas, this is even in the Atlanta Police Department. We've been fighting, people have been fighting for years, and it's still going on. And so again, this kind of teaching, encouraging people to fear their Muslim neighbors, encouraging cops to fear the Muslims they are sworn to protect and serve, leads to the over-criminalization of the Muslim community, the targeting of the community, and eventually the imprisonment of the community. These are just examples of things that are actually on the Gilley website right now. Quote, this is something the Gilley director said, quote, the problem is because of the First Amendment, the FBI won't go into mosques. Quote, and this is on the Gilley website, from within Islamic sources, and I'm talking about the leadership, varied as it is, there has not been a single unequivocal condemnation of September 11th. Muslims have condemned 9/11. Even though we have no obligation to condemn what we have nothing to do in the first place, but that's another story. Quote, meanwhile, self-styled Arab American advocacy groups continue to support terror while focusing their efforts on mounting frivolous complaints about violations of their rights. This is what cops are being taught in the state of Georgia, right? So you can see the end result of those teachings. Yes, ma'am.
Would you pronounce that organization again?
Gilley, G-I-L-E-E. So Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange.
Okay.
One more, the silent majority of Muslims and their various advocacy groups have not broken their silence about terrorism, jihad, and their attitude to the West. This is all being taught to Atlanta Police Department officers. So that's, again, one example, Muslims being targeted. So again, we're talking about the process that leads to mass incarceration. You got number one, targeting Muslims, right? Unfair investigations, training cops in bad ideas that they've been acted upon, entrapping Muslims. Okay, next, once a Muslim has been targeted, once they got arrested for something, terrorism or something completely different, what happens when they're defended? What happens in the criminal justice system, okay? So number one thing, the first thing you experience is inflammatory media coverage, right? White guy does something, robbery, murder, whatever, it's just, regular news. A Muslim does something, whatever it is, beats up a kid at school, steals something, the immediate connection that someone will find is, oh, look at the Muslims, we gotta kick them out. It becomes a media story, okay? Next thing that we deal with is in court, those informants who were speaking to Muslims and trapping Muslims, their testimony is valid. Perfectly legal right now that they can come in and testify, oh yeah, he told me this, he told me that, and sometimes those conversations are not even recorded. So you're just relying on what the informant claims a Muslim said to him, right? And the informant is just assumed to be telling the truth. And also you can introduce whatever entrapment evidence. So for example, cops might make a fake explosive or a fake whatever, give it to the person, hey, you want to use this? And that can be introduced even though there was never a real weapon used. Yes, ma'am?
Isn't it also true that sometimes the informants are being offered things by the police?
Right. I mean, it could be, for
An
example,
opportunity to stay in the country, for example.
right. So let's say you got an immigrant who wrote a letter wrong on his immigration paperwork, right? Called in the FBI. So look, you made a mistake. Looks like you're going back to Somalia, but you can stay if you help us out, right? And so they have a vested interest in finding crimes that may not exist. Okay. Another thing, especially in terrorism trials, and we're going to talk about this more, secret evidence, literally evidence the defense does not get to see. The judge only sees it and says, yeah, it's valid and it's introduced. Secret witnesses, literally you can have, there was one case of Muslims who were charged with funding terrorism overseas, and the first trial was a mistrial. They were not convicted because the evidence was not there. The second trial, the government brought in literally a secret witness, an Israeli government agent who could not be identified by name, his background not shared. He testified under concealment, under a hidden identity, and they were convicted the second time around, sentenced to life in prison. Limited communications with
That
family
person
and
doesn't
attorneys.
get cross-examined.
So yes, he does. But the defense doesn't know anything about his background. They can't say who he is. So all they can do is cross him on what he said in court. But they can't target his credibility, right? So again, this is what Muslims go through, and uniquely Muslims in the criminal justice system. You don't see Paul Manafort, you don't see any Russian witnesses, testifying against Paul Manafort, right? Right? So this is something unique to Muslims, okay? Another thing you see is very limited communication. Muslims being locked up in pretrial detention, not getting bond at all. We talk about how bail is, bad, but we're talking not getting bail at all. You're just locked up, period. You're a Muslim accused of doing something that they think is really very dangerous, and you're locked up. And then getting very harsh sentences, life sentences for a crime that included no actual victim, just for what you supposedly plotted to do. Let me give you some examples of how this does not only relate to terrorism offenses, how if you're just Muslim, committing just a regular old crime, Islamophobia can impact you in the system. So this is a case that we just took. This case comes from 2007. The man on the left is William Powell, the woman on the right is Sharmila Powell. Mr. Powell allegedly was a drug dealer, right? Not a very good guy. His wife, Muslim, on the right path, taking care of their kids. He's out acting a fool, but she's doing what she's supposed to do, okay? This is in South Georgia, okay? It's an old, white, very conservative county. She allegedly, this is the allegation, that she drove him to an apartment. He went inside and committed a robbery of a fellow drug dealer. A shootout broke out. Someone got killed. 2 people got killed. He was charged with armed robbery and murder. She was charged with, what do you think? Excessive felony murder. They said that she knew what he was going to do when she drove him there, and therefore she's part of the crime. One of their witnesses also claimed that she herself was involved somehow, but that witness was actually a drug dealer who had thousands of dollars worth of cocaine in the house and lied about that to try to. Anyway, I'm going into much detail. But here's what's interesting about this case, right? Does it have anything to do with Islam? Muslims? No, okay? Here's what happened at trial. This is in 2007. The prosecutor, number one, wanted to make sure that the jury knew she was Muslim. So even though she was not wearing a hijab in court, they made a deliberate decision not to reveal she was Muslim to the jury, since this is in a very all-white county, very conservative, out in Podunk, Georgia, and they did not want the jury to deal with anti-Muslim bias, okay? So they were not going to tell the jury she was Muslim. Her driver's license photo had her picture of her wearing the hijab, right? It did not need to be introduced, but the prosecutor started fighting to introduce it. The defense said, whoa, judge, we don't want this, as they're going to see. The prosecutor says, well, it's her choice to wear that thing. It's not my fault. The driver's license gets introduced, okay? So that's, but that's not the worst part. When she gets on the stand and testifies her own defense, this is what the prosecutor says to her. Again, Islam has not been brought up at all. After he's taken her oath, he says, quote, "You don't believe in taking oaths, do you?" She responds, "Yes, I do." The defense attorney says, "Judge, I object." The judge says, "Overruled." The prosecutor continues, "What are your beliefs about taking oaths and telling the truth in our courts of law?" Our courts of law.
Wow.
She responds, "The same as everybody else's." He says, "They are." She says, "Yes, they are." He says, "You're not free from having to tell the truth in a non-Muslim courtroom." This is what he says to her in front of the jury, in front of the judge. The defense attorney does not bother objecting again. The judge lets this happen. The jury hears this. And then she has to explain that she is a Muslim and defend her religion. She says, "No, my religion does not interfere with any oath within the United States, period. My religion is my religion. I'm a Muslim, that's it. I believe in one God. I don't believe that Jesus, peace be upon him, is God. That's my religion," basically states. He says, okay. She was convicted of felony murder, sentenced to life in prison. She is sitting in jail right now. We've taken her case. She's got a new hearing scheduled in October. She's had great attorneys before King and Spalding representing her, fought this thing, and they have not won yet. We're going to try. But I give you this example to show how Islamophobia played a role in something, a criminal case that had nothing to do with Islam at all, right? She committed literally, they got her on felony murder, which is a whole nother issue of asking how many people get locked up based on something they may or may not have known was going to happen, right? You're a teenager, you drive someone to a grocery store, a supermarket, they walk in and do something, you're going to jail for life with them, right? All this, I give you these examples, all this leads to mass incarceration. It's not just talking about what happens when they get to prison, it's how they get there in the first place. From the law enforcement training, investigation, the trials, to the prison. Okay. This is a federal example. So remember, I told you about this earlier. These were 5 Muslim activists who were led a charity. They were accused of funding Palestinian terrorists by sending money overseas. Never mind the fact that they've been doing it for years. The government knew about it. They were sending money to the same people the government, the U.S. government was sending money to. But the government alleged, well, when they did it, they were doing this. They wanted to support terrorists. Anyway, this, again, they had a mistrial the first time. Second time around, secret witness. They were convicted. They're serving 65 years in prison, which is a life sentence. Okay, so we talked about the targeting. We talked about what Muslims can go through when they're defendants. Okay, now when they're in prison, what's going on? What are the prison conditions that make it very difficult for some Muslims to make it out of prison ever, or make it out in a way where they're mentally fit and able to start their life over again? What's going on in the prison system? First, let's talk about the federal prison system. What are things happening there? So number one, before Muslims are even convicted of crimes, they're getting locked up without bond at all. Okay, so they can spend literally years in jail. The examples I gave you, they were in jail for years before they even went to trial. Second thing that's happening often is solitary confinement, right? Especially for people who are Muslim and a little famous. I'll give you an example in a moment. Because they don't want these people proselytizing. They're terrified they're going to come somehow create new terrorists. So a lot of Muslims get locked up in solitary confinement 23 hours a day in jail, and they actually get a life sentence, right? And you're in, for the rest of your life. A little box all the time, right? Often Muslims are sent to maximum security prisons. So not just your regular prison like whatever Paul Manafort's at, or whatever these other people get to go to, or Bernie Madoff, right? But max, super max, right? Where you were just locked up in the strictest conditions. And also, and we're going to talk about this, a limited access to family, attorneys, and even a complete ban on free speech. You can't talk to journalists, reporters. Let me give you one example. This is A-Trap Brown, also known as Imam Jamil Al-Amin. So as you all know, he was convicted of murder, of killing a police officer over 10 years ago. He just had a habeas hearing a few months ago. A witness, a person, has taken responsibility for the crime. And so they're trying to get a new trial or the conviction overturned because someone else has admitted they did it. But he's been locked up for over 10 years. So I don't want to get into that, the case itself. I want to talk about what he's gone through in prison. 20 years. 20 years, okay. 20 years. So number one, here's what's unique. He was locked up in a state prison, right? He was a state prisoner locked in a state prison. When he was in prison, he's safe. He's A-Trap back, right? Yeah. Number one, he starts organizing inmates to demand better conditions, better rights, right? Can't do this to us, can't do that to us. In a very polite way, requesting accommodations and fair treatment, okay? Second thing is people started converting to Islam like crazy in that prison where he was, because he was, preacher doing whatever, right? So the state prison system of Georgia did something unheard of. They had him transferred out of Georgia custody to federal custody. Wow. And he was then locked in Supermax in Colorado. Do you know Supermax? Where Timothy Bay was, where the Unabomber is, where the first World Trade Center bomber is, the worst of the worst. You were in a cement, the worst cement prison you can imagine, okay? They sent him there, and essentially they admitted this. They said, we're concerned he's going to spread extremism without any evidence, right? That was unheard of to do that, okay? So an extreme example, and he is not able to speak to a reporter. He's been in solitary confinement, limited access to family. And this is what he looked like when he was in trial. This is what he looks like now. Yeah. He's essentially dying. He's got cancer, also doing health me. He was moved out of Supermax because it was killing him. He's now in a prison, I think, in Indiana, somewhere, but he's getting medical treatment now. But that's after the fact. When you get put in solitary confinement, the natural and predictable end result is it destroys your body and your mind. Okay? So that's an example. All right, now what about Muslims as state prisoners? What's happening in our state prison system? This is what I deal with regularly. I can't tell you how many phone calls we get about state prison issues. So number one, limits on their ability to practice their religion. A lot of people who either convert to Islam in prison or come into prison as Muslims, maybe not very good Muslims, prison gives you time to think and to get your act together. So they want to get better. They want to come out as better Muslims, obeying the law, being good citizens, right? But you can't do that if you can't practice your faith, you can't learn about your faith, right? So number one, the Georgia prison system has a ban on translations of the Quran, the Islamic holy book they don't like. That's number one, right? Number two, and this happened, if an inmate tries to get religious literature in Arabic, there have been incidents where the prisons will ban it saying, we don't know what it says, so you can't have it. Even though it's clearly, in a religious book, it's clearly religious text, right? Number three, restrictions on their ability to wear Islamic clothing, to groom themselves. For example, some Muslims want to grow beards. No, you can't do that. We may not be able to recognize who you are if you grow a beard. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of an Arkansas inmate back it's in the past 10 years, who wanted to grow a beard. So in theory now, inmates can grow beards if they want to, but in theory. And then the big thing we deal with is religious discrimination accommodations. For example, in jail, you ever watch Locked Up? You often see Christians perform Christian prayer circles, right? Mm-hmm. Cool, no problem, that's great. But if two Muslims want to pray together side by side, you know what happens to them? They are banned from doing so, and they are punished with solitary confinement. Two men praying together, you will be put in solitary confinement. Wow. It's happened over and over. Right now, we have not gotten this overturned. There is a ban right now in the Georgia prison system on two people praying together if they're Muslim. Can't do it. And they will punish them with solitary confinement if they do it. It is. It is. And this is a brother who was actually a white American, went to jail when he was 13 years old, spent 20 years in jail. He converted to Islam in jail, and he talked about solitary confinement, what he experienced as a Muslim, because, when he was white, maybe it was cool. Once he became Muslim, like everybody else, bro, you did it too, right? And he was put in solitary confinement as well. So this is a quote of an interaction he had with an officer that predicated him going to solitary confinement. An officer said to him, "I don't know why you white boys are always taking the fall from Muslims. After the Muslims, they got to go back and forth. He got put in solitary confinement. Limited amount of time, but he said even the limited time he was there, he held it together, but he heard so many other people going just nuts, right? It's literally mental torture, okay? And I would submit to you that, Muslims in particular are subjected to it. So those are some of the things that are going on. So we talked about the process, right? So first we talked about what? The investigation, the targeting of Muslims, right, in these unique and I submit to you illegal ways, okay? Mm-hmm. Then we talked about what Muslims experience when they are defendants, right? The unfair things they go through as defendants, right? Then we talked about what they go through when they are in prison, right? The unfair things they go through in prison that make it hard for them to practice their faith, to get their minds together, and make it impossible for them to get out of prison in a way in which they're going to be able to contribute back to society, if they ever get out at all, right? And so the point here is that because American Muslims only make up 0.9% of the U.S. population total, but what percent of prisoners? 9%. American Muslims are 9% of the American prison population. So for CAIR, for a Muslim civil rights organization, number one, we've got to care about criminal justice reform because it's an important issue, period. But we also have to care about it because it is in particular impacting American Muslims at a level disproportionate to our presence in the country. So it's important to us. I'm glad to support Ebenezer Baptist Church and all the organizations there. So I hope that we are able to leave this event this weekend committed to solving this issue, or at least making it better in the short term. It's not going to be an easy fix. It's going to take years. But I think my panelists might have some ideas about what we can do to improve this. So with that, these are some, we can talk about this with the panelists. Okay, so let me invite up our three panelists and we'll let them introduce themselves. Mel, come on up, please. Mel, come on up. Tariq, come on up. So our three panelists, this is Tariq Baiyina, who is with IMAN Atlanta. That's the Inner City Muslim Action Network. Mel, Professor Dr. Mel Ledbetter, if I pronounce that correctly. Underbakke, excuse me. Yeah, I'm imagining things, Mel. And Imam Dawud, Walid, who's the director of CAIR-MIchigan, our Michigan chapter. Okay. And so what I want to do is essentially let you hear some of their thoughts about the problem and potential solutions. So we talked a lot about the problems. What are some potential solutions, and what are some of the things you all have done to work on this? Is what I want to talk about. So let me start by asking you first to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about why this topic is relevant to you personally. Can we start with you, Tariq, and then work our way down?
Sure. Assalamu alaikum, peace, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Tariq Baiyina. Briefly, I work with IMAN Atlanta, Inner City Muslim Action Network. We're based in Chicago, but we have offices here in Atlanta, and we do work here in Atlanta, mainly surrounding returning citizens, but also campaign work and criminal justice reform and community organizing. So I personally spent 15 years in prison in the Georgia State Department of Correction. So I have an intimate ideal of what it is to be Muslim in Georgia, Department of Correction in particular. I want to acknowledge a friend of mine, Sonali Siddiqui, who's here with us today, whose brother is undergoing some of some of the injustices that Brother Ahmed Mitchell explained right now. And so he's in prison right now for some. You know, I went to prison on criminal charges, right, in Cobb County. And so I want us to be able to point out two different things and ideas, really identify the differences between criminal, a person being Muslim and going into criminal court and being afforded due process of law, as opposed to a person being railroaded just for being Muslim, you know, and being in prison for a long period of time, many times without any charge at all. And so I feel for her brother and the many Muslims that are like, I was at least afforded some form of due process when I went on the criminal charge. So I would like to just make that distinction between the two. We have a lot to talk about. I'm not going to take up all the time, but
Okay, so I'm Underbakke. I'm the executive director of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, and Sonali Siddiqui is a member of our board of directors of a number of years now. And this became important to me. I'm from Tampa, Florida. I was at the University of South Florida. I was a professor there, and Samuel Arian was also there. And you know Samuel Arian's case. He was probably the first test case of the Patriot Act. So he was indicted, charged with terrorism, supporting terrorism. And a lot of this, in this presentation, alludes to a lot of what happened to him. There was no due process, I can answer that for sure. He spent 2.5 years in solitary confinement, pre-trial. So, and during that time, we kind of got involved right away because I knew him. I knew his family, and I became very good friends with his family, and I was pretty much there the whole time through the 3 years, and it was just really shocking what was going on to him. About 6 months without any contact, with no phone calls, no nothing, for 6 months pre-trial. And this, as you may know, also the jury found him innocent of terrorism charges, but nonetheless, he spent 5.5 years in prison. He spent another 5 years in house arrest, and now he's living in Istanbul. And he's doing quite well there. But the really sad thing, he's got 4 grandkids, who I think the oldest one maybe now is 7 years old. The youngest one is a few months old. You'll see them at most once a year, and it's a difficult trip to take, you know, a mother with 3 kids. In fact, his daughter, Lena, is our associate director of our organization. So when she goes to Istanbul with her 3 kids, it's very difficult. So it destroys families, it destroys lives. And that's why it's important.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dawud, Walid. I'm the executive director of the Michigan chapter of CAIR. So I'm in the CAIR family with Brother Edward. I've been the director of the Michigan chapter for over a decade now. Also, I served as an imam at 2 mosques before metropolitan Detroit, and I still give sermons and talks across North America. So basically, I have a common interest in dealing with common issues that Brother Edward talked about and what he does. So I don't want to be redundant, right? In terms of that, I will say 2 things before we avail ourselves for more conversation and discussion. And the first is this: is that when we look at the statistics as far as the Muslims being almost 1% of the American population, but about 9% of the prison population. And when you're black and Muslim in the United States of America, that's a double whammy as far as the criminal injustice system here in the United States of America. And I say injustice system because people say the system's broken. I say, no, it's operating exactly the way it was designed. Right, so I think we should adjust our language and stop saying the system's broken. It's not broken. It's because you can't have so many repeating results, decade after decade after decade, and it not be deliberate. That'd be unscientific, right? So that's one thing. The second thing is that when we talk about anti-Muslim anti-Muslim bigotry, some prefer the term Islamophobia, and I'll even take it to anti-black racism in a broader sense, is we have to be diligent and work for better policies and litigate things in court. But I say this all the time, bigotry cannot be legislated nor adjudicated away. There's no set of policies, there's no set of laws, and there's no amount of court cases that can take racism and bigotry out of people's hearts, right? This is a spiritual issue, and it also relates a lot to education, what Brother Edward is talking about. But even before something intellectual, it is really a spiritual issue, a spiritual malady, and I would like for us to see us more in general in the movement of ending mass incarceration, in particular when we're talking about the excess amount of Muslims that are in the criminal injustice system, that we really try to look at this more from a spiritual perspective and discuss this issue more in our congregations and give spiritual remedies, not just secular, legal, and court remedies, because these are necessary, but there's a missing piece. There's three pieces, and the spiritual piece, and many times, is a missing piece. And just living in close proximity and knowing someone doesn't get rid of bigotry, right? Because if that were the case, my ancestors from my father's side of the family were on plantations right here in Georgia, and they lived in a slave cabin right next to the big house. And white folks knew them for generations, enough to trust them to cook their food, to nurse their babies, knew them very well. And they still look at us as being subhuman. So just proximity and knowing something about someone does not get rid of bigotry in and of itself. Because if that were the case, we'd be post-racial in America, especially in southern states, especially here in Georgia, right? So I just had to say that, and I'll stop preaching. I'm a preacher.
Mel, can we come back to you? Can we talk about, what are some of the ideas that your organization has to solve some of the problems? And then Tariq, what I want you to talk about is, if you can, what is IMAN Atlanta, what are you all doing to try to help people who have been victims of mass incarceration, who managed to get out or are still in? What are you guys trying to do to help people who have been victims of the system get back in the world? So I'll just tell you that as you start thinking, but now you can go first.
Just a broad overview first. We do quite a lot of things, and one is you talked some about the family and the effects on the family. So we provide some advocacy with prisoners and support the families, and so that's Sonali. So we have conferences for the families, provide some legal advice when we can, and I'm interested lately. You've seen the articles about a lot of these terrorists are getting out of prison. Are they going to go out and do terroristic things? I said no, they're going to become activists because they all want to join us and help us. So, and our legal department lately they have drafted a bill to end the entrapment. So that's what I really want to talk about. It would do three things. First, the entrapment, a lot of times the highly paid informant goes in and creates a plot, and they befriend somebody who needs money, he needs food, he needs something, probably maybe needs friends even. They'll give him money for the sandwich, so, put all the plot together for him to pick the target, and then they film the guy, and then he goes to prison for who knows how long. I know a man in Tampa was mentally ill, but they knew it, that's why he was an easy target, because with the informant there, I think they get paid a lot, like $250,000 for conviction, so it's a very well paid job, but they do turn on you. We have another prisoner in there that we deal with who was an informant, but not an informant, he's now in prison. And also not a terrorist, but still, we make that a thing, there have to be a plot first before the informant comes in. So they can't create the plot and then bring in their targets. And the other thing it would do, it limit prosecutions to people who intend some violence. But for the most part, other people, they don't intend violence. They're lured into this plot. And you talked about the classified evidence that only the judge sees. The defense, you can't even vet the witness because you have no idea who it is. So this would end that. Anything shown to the judge has to be shown to the defense also. If Yeah, so we have, the stage we're at, and asking for help here. The stage we're at now is gathering support and trying to get it introduced into Congress. The person that our legal department has been approaching is Hakeem Jeffries in New York. Okay, and this, they met with his staffer, and we also have a letter of endorsement. All of our coalition members, there are about 14 coalition members, and most of our family members have signed it. So we're asking if people want to sign that letter of endorsement and find out more about this. Sonali has a sign-up sheet. If you put your email address, I'll send you all this stuff. I'll send you. They also have just come out with this book, Inventing Terrorists. Our legal department put this together. They investigated all of the cases that the federal government says were terrorist convictions. And they found out basically they're not terrorist convictions. They're mostly preemptive prosecution, as we've been talking about. So we have copies of this available for donations. We also have it online, so if you put your email address, I'll send you the links to all of that, and we'll be doing this. Change this.
So again, that's a bill that has actually been written. Ready, but we just need to be introduced in Congress. Hopefully some of our fine Georgia congressmen or women can make that happen. Tariq, we have questions.
Sorry, did you say that bill is for Georgia or?
No, so it'll be a federal bill. It's a federal, not a state bill, it's a federal one.
Yeah.
It would be a federal one.
So can I ask a question?
Please.
It seems to me like this might be a particular moment when it would be helpful for you to press some of these other members of this coalition to join such a letter or to issue a statement of communities of faith about fairness and justice in the courts and in support of the legislation.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like if this is not what we're here for, like, you know, this is the moment they were talking about where some folks may be uncomfortable or we have to explain something to your congregation. It seems to me that this is what is needed now, because it's going to be a lot more difficult if all these denominations and faith communities join you in this effort. And so I would strongly encourage that, first of all, and I have some names of congregations myself in New York. So that's one. And the second is that in New York, where I'm from, when we uncovered that the previous police chief was doing this kind of discriminatory training, the way we were able to take it down was because we already had a very broad coalition of communities, of people of the criminal justice system. So there were people who were anti-policing, were anti-policing brutality. There were people who were anti-detention. There were people who were against, a lot of stuff, including the Muslim ban before. And so they all came together, LGBTQ, everybody, they all came together and said, this has to stop, and that is one of the ways they couldn't defend it. And so I know that it's hard, and I'm sure that there has been hesitancy amongst other potential allies, but it seems like this might be a moment to really, to push for that. And I would encourage all of our partners to join and support this work.
Thank you. You had a question over here?
I did. Kind of following on that, and you've answered part of it, but to the panel, as somebody who's not Muslim, how is it that as a faith person I can come out and encourage my community in ways to support what you guys are doing and what some of the most, and we are based here in Georgia, like what are some of the kind of the key issues that we can help engage around and provide both not only legislative advocacy, but mobilization around needs of prisoners and their rights and Muslims within our population even now. So whether it's on the prosecutorial side, whether it's needs-based, like what are kind of like the hot button issues that I can actually get people involved in on a bunch of different levels to stay engaged and create those broad coalitions and connections that we're talking about.
Are you based in Georgia?
Yeah, we're based here in Atlanta.
So let me take this first, and I'll tell some of you. So, as a director of CAIR Georgia, I'd say a big part of what we do is to try to make sure that when we tackle issues like this, we're doing it in an interfaith way, in a way that crosses communities, right? Because if I go and fight a battle myself, you know, may win, may lose, right? But it's always better if you got people alongside you to fight it with you, right? Because it doesn't just impact us, and it won't just benefit us if we win. And so whether that's the Sikh community, the Jewish community, Christian community, if you see me at a press conference, there will usually be people up there that makes it look like we're the United Nations. And that's a deliberate choice on my part to make sure that we are reflecting the diversity of the community and highlighting the fact that these issues impact all of us. So a few different issues that the faith community has already been helpful with. One, incidents of government discrimination.
Yeah.
So that could be anything from a case we have right now where a Muslim law enforcement officer has been banned from wearing hijab, and that ban they've implemented could impact Sikhs and Jews and Catholic nuns if they wanted to be law enforcement officers. So, you know, we got people together to work on that issue. Gilly, that I told you about, the police training thing, that has been, people have tried to take that program on for years, but they keep doing it by themselves. So, for example, one year, Palestinian activists would try to take it on because the main training partner is the Israeli government, and they said, well, that's bad, the Israeli government is bad thing, so we shouldn't train with them. But they do it mostly by themselves with a few other allies. Then another year, Black Lives Matter takes it on, but mostly by themselves, and it doesn't work. Asim Reed says, no, I love Gilly, we're going to keep doing it, right? What we're doing this time is we have spent literally 3 years. First, we met with Mayor Bottoms during the campaign when she was not the mayor, got her to agree in writing to freeze the program and meet with us. Then we waited more to gather more information about the program. We brought together a coalition of scholars and organizations and faith leaders and activists, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, every walk of life I could think of, to all get together to say this is not okay. Our officers should not be training this program. And so that's something that we would welcome more support for. Those are the two main things I can think of, right? So much of what we do is putting out fires, so you never really know when a fire is going to erupt, and when the faith community can be helpful in putting out that fire, but I know it when I see it. So definitely I'll try to connect with you and get you information so we can be available. And then I want to toss it into Zayn if they have ideas about things that they're doing or things they've experienced in their...
And I think that that's part of it is that we deal with a lot of fires as well.
Yeah.
And one of my goals is to help prevent those fires in the first place by putting in structures and connections and relationships that would allow us to get in there before fires erupt to create, you know, reasonable solutions, or at least potentially looking at longer term solutions.
Any extra
I
thoughts?
just a thought. I'm also not Muslim, and I don't know if there's any cases, any terrorism cases in Georgia right now, but if you know of anybody that gets arrested with terrorism charges, contact them, go to the trial, show support, and when you have a person, you will be able to rally the troops around them. We were, Sammy's support in Tampa was, actually it was about 100% Christian, I would think, because the Muslims were afraid. And it's understandable, you know, so, but when you have an actual person that bring in, it really, it makes it a lot easier to get people. We had, you know, hundreds of people we could turn out almost overnight if we had a hearing or something, we wanted people out.
I can also mention something too, and I think this could be instructive for you, especially for those of you who are faith leaders in your congregations in particular. And the reality of it is that putting social media, or sometimes anti-social media aside, is that the days of worship in congregations are probably the one time of a week where you get a mass of people together at any sort of location, right? So what we've tried to facilitate, actually what we have done over the years, is that we've allowed different people from different communities to come into mosque to basically address the Muslim community about a particular issue for a certain amount of time, like on Fridays, for instance, or right after, like after the congregational prayer. And then likewise, like there's many churches that I've gone into, right, and actually gone in front of the congregation. I've been introduced by the pastor, and to be able to speak to the congregation, right, because it's one thing to have a pastor from a congregation on your side and maybe show up for a press conference, but then sometimes the congregation's not with the pastor, right? Or not with the rabbi, or they don't know what the rabbi or what the pastor's doing, right? So it's sometimes better to have someone from the affected community to go in front of the congregation and speak about some of the things that are going on, instead of just, you know, the pastor or the rabbi shows up with Brother Edward at the press conference and then like, oh, why are you standing there with the Antichrist or whatever? You understand what I'm saying, right?
That's a good point. Can I have, Tariq has got, you know, has been waiting to get his, and then we'll jump back to more questions. Let me just let Tariq share his
So, I was gonna comment on what you said. I think it pretty much answered a lot of what your question was about. But as far as getting the coalition involved in this effort with this legislation, I think that it was a great point, and mainly because, well, partly because preemptive prosecution predates what Muslims are going through right now. So black people have been suffering from preemptive prosecution for decades under RICO, right?
Yes.
So a lot of the things that this addresses issues in our communities as well, right? From when you talk about organized crime all the way up until, you know, the 80s and the 90s, and so many people getting caught on conspiracy charges going to the Fed. So this is something that it creates self-interest, you know, pretty much in everybody in the coalition.
And
And
now,
so
do we have, oh, sorry,
I just want to make that point. He made he asked me to speak briefly about what we do, right? So from a practical standpoint, what IMAN does is we capture returning citizens. So this is why I don't know if people know this, but in Georgia, in prison, in state prison, you don't get paid for the work that you do, right? There's no stipend. You're made to work. You're gonna work. You're gonna do some kind of detail, but you're not gonna get paid for it. So you know. But what you will get is a $25 check on your way out the door. That's what they'll give you, and a bus ticket. That's about the size of it. And a good luck. See you soon. Really.
Yeah.
So what we do is we capture returning citizens, individuals coming out of prison, and afford them the opportunity to have training in, right now, construction trades, right, and soft skills training, along with also entrepreneurial training. Because as we've heard throughout the conference and yesterday about so many of the discrimination that people go through as felons, right, in employment and housing. Also, we provide temporary housing as well. So employment, housing, disenfranchisement, and the voting arena, and so many different things that can go on and on. So we're looking to address some of these things, and we do it directly through our Green Reentry program, but we also are spearheading a campaign, or developing a campaign right now, criminal justice reform campaign, that is focused on creating awareness around these injustices. Because, I mean, for so long, I want to just take a poll here for a second, if I might. So how many people, we're gonna just imagine that we're all a community here, right? And we all live in the same place, and we all have shared values. How many people in here have a relative that has been to prison or is in prison now? Wow. Yes, everybody. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect that.
It's a bigger problem than you thought.
And so, but what I want you to realize is that you're one person, one vote, right? Now, your family member could also be one person, one vote in this community of ours. And it would help to push our agenda, whatever that might be. But they can't. And so, in essence, our community is weakened because of it. We see that?
Yeah.
And this is something that is going on for decades. I mean, since coming out of Reconstruction. And so, I mean, we're suffering from this, and no one has really addressed the root issues of this problem. And this is what we want to do. We want to create awareness around it, and we're happy to be here with this coalition and the opportunity to do that.
So we got a few questions. Let me first, Mel, do we have copies of the bill?
Yeah, I do not have them.
What's the
We
number?
got email addresses, so I think Tariq made a good point. You got the letter, okay, good. What is that, it's a great thing, that something coming out of this, there's actually a bill written
Yes.
that would address some of the federal overreach ban this classified evidence, require sharing with defense attorneys, make entrapment no longer permissible for use in prosecutions. So there's a bill that's been written, they just need a congressperson to sponsor it and get it in, so.
Has the bill been given a number?
No, it hasn't been introduced yet. So
It
it's
hasn't been given a number, okay.
It does not have.
Ego Act, what's it
But
stand
put
for?
your email on and I will.
Entrapment and governmental overreach.
Entrapment and governmental overreach, so. Again, so get with me,
And I also get a card from me also, so if you don't receive that and want it, maybe couldn't read what you wrote on that sign-up sheet. So send me a message if you want information about it and you didn't receive it.
okay, we got a few questions, we're gonna do it fast, we're running out of time, we're gonna take this brother, here, and then here. Okay.
Real quick, to underscore the idea Bakke was saying about joining and having this here for us in New York, that when they had the shooting in Christchurch in New Zealand, we showed up at the masjid. It was on Thursday, so Friday was a perfect time. So all of us, ministers, rabbis, and we formed those relationships that you can actually use when the time comes. And I was a chaplain at Sing Sing for almost 10 years. The Imam and I used to travel together a lot. And he would say to me, when we got back, we'd travel to Germany, Ethiopia, Rwanda. He would say, watch this. As we entered the airport, Dulles Airport, they would stop us every time. Because of him.
Yeah.
Just in case you doubt that. So our relationship with him and the priest, Father Ron, Rabbi Epstein, when his wife died, all of us showed up at the masjid for the funeral of his wife. That is what works because we had in Newburgh, some of you familiar with the Newburgh?
Yeah.
When they set them up, the informant did that. That was the Imam movement from Sing Sing.
Yeah.
In Buffalo, they did the same thing. So when you form these relationships, they come handy when each way. I just want to underscore.
Before something bad.
Exactly, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm with the DeKalb County Jail mobilization. We're having a protest July 1st, just in case people want to know about it. I'm one of the people that's been collecting prisoner stories in the last 2 months about the conditions inside the DeKalb County Jail. And the reports that I'm getting from a variety of prisoners are that the Muslims were not getting the second meal of the day, so that when Ramadan happened, they were being reduced supposedly to 2 meals a day, and then reports are that they're only getting one of those 2 meals, and that those meals are all bagged. So those are the least calorie, and the weight was dropping, and it was these terrible conditions of prisoners being hungry. We're a new group, we're still forming, one of the reasons we're at the conference is to try and develop relationships. Where do you think we should be trying to get complaints in? What I should be telling the prisoners to do on the inside to fight this particular injustice?
So to address that issue, so actually it was even worse than that. We just in the DeKalb County Jail, we got a complaint. I'm not sure if it came from you, but we had a complaint that some inmates were not getting their suhoor, that is their breakfast, on time. So if you're not Muslim, basically Muslims will eat during Ramadan before dawn. They'll eat a meal to hold them for the day, and then right after sunset they break their fast. So what's happening in the DeKalb County Jail was they were getting their meals at like 10 a.m., way after dawn, and literally someone was telling the inmates, well, it's still dark outside, so, it's fine, it's still 6 a.m., so it's cool. So they were getting the meal late, so they couldn't eat breakfast, and then they were getting their dinner meal like 10 o'clock at night, so they were essentially starving, right?
Yeah.
And so, when we got that complaint, we essentially reached out to the jail directly, sent a polite but very forceful letter, and they very quickly solved that issue. The secondary issue, how much food they're getting, I think Ramadan ended before we got that resolved, but every Ramadan that happens at a different jail.
It's still not resolved.
That's still not resolved. So every Ramadan that happens at a different jail. So one of the things that we try to do is, if we know that a jail, we have, for example, law enforcement guides that we send out that let the jails know what they need to do in advance. So one of the things I think we'll try to do next year, God willing, is all the major Metro Atlanta jails, even though they already have the systems in place, but apparently sometimes they just screw it up and they don't know. So I think we can proactively go after the jails that we know have at least one Muslim there and make sure to remind them, even if they've been doing it correctly all these years, for some reason they still screw up, somehow. So that's something we can do. Yeah.
What we had to do in Michigan Department, correct? We sued Michigan Department of Corrections twice regarding this issue. The first one was just to have the allowance of the meals to begin with. The second thing is we had to sue them relating to the meals in the right time, the whole caloric intake situation. Because what they were doing is say, oh, well, we'll give you a meal beforehand, early, and give you one afterwards, but then they were cutting down on the amount of calories. So it wasn't even, it was nowhere close to the calories that a regular inmate would get for 3 meals. It was actually, it was reduced calories that would be for regular 2 meals. So what happened is the only way we could remedy that in Michigan, we tried the nice approach. We had to file 2 lawsuits. One was in conjunction with ACLU Michigan. The second one was just strictly through our office.
And was that with
And
Trinity?
we were successful, by the way.
Was
but-
that with Trinity Services? Because
No.
they are the food providers here. Okay, okay.
We had a question, yeah, here and then here, yes.
I just want to kind of piggyback on when he did the survey about all the hands that raised up, and what Brother Dawud was saying about, and piggybacking on what Michelle Alexander said about the spiritual revolution. When Dr. King said, okay, we got to take another route and deal with human rights, this room should be packed. Because this is not just about American Muslims, just because it hasn't happened to you yet, that don't mean that you don't supposed to get on the battlefield like the workers that boycotted the bus. We can't even get people to turn their cell phones off for 5 seconds or 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Because if we all adhere to whatever religious background we adhere to, what would Jesus do? What would Muhammad do? What would Moses do? The flood don't start at the top, it starts at the bottom. You follow what I'm saying? So sometimes we get in these positions and we forget about the downtrodden, the people that have been in prison. Because what does an ex-offender look like? Do he look like Michael Vick? Do he look like Bill Campbell? Do she look like Martha Stewart? Do he look like Reverend Martin Luther King? Do he look like me? He look like, and she looks like your everyday people. So we got to start really coming together on a spiritual bond, because there's many rivers, but there's only one ocean. And if we take that and move out on that, we can get together and get something done. Because look, it ain't about what you believe, it's what you execute off of your belief.
Amen. I think we got a few more people, so we can talk fast. We get everyone. Yes.
Just to piggyback off what the brother said earlier, I want to congratulate you on what you all are doing here in Georgia. And like myself, I spent 20 years in federal prison, and I've been home now for almost 3 years. And I started a nonprofit organization called Project Bold, and it stands for Building Outstanding Lives Together. And everything that you're tackling are the same issues that I'm trying to create in Charlotte, North Carolina. And mainly, especially, the most important one is housing. Because if individuals can come home and have a foundation, we can teach them trades from a school. You know what I'm saying? We can find them jobs. But if he or she doesn't have somewhere to live, it creates a bigger problem of the repeat or the recidivism rate. Because the first law of the land is self-preservation.
Right.
You're going to do what you got to do to survive. So before this is over, I'm going to make sure I can give you my information, because I'd like to know how y'all are, because everything I'm doing is new. So
So you know, our office is at 1523 Ralph David Abernathy, right there in Westview. 1523 Ralph David Abernathy. We meet every Thursday at 6 o'clock for what we call grassroots power hour to discuss these things, right? And you can come, I mean, somebody's always in the office throughout the week, so you can come anytime, we can sit down and chop it up. But I'm glad you're doing that work. We need to have people across the country doing this work, because one organization is not going to be able to do it all.
Right. Just like the brother said too, is that what we have to understand is the people that's closer to the problem are closer to the solutions that needs to be done in these communities.
I think we